Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to the special Washington Post Intelligence Weekly Briefing, coming to you live on stage from the 19th Annual ISOA Global Summit in Washington, D.C. That is the International Stability Operations Association, a premier gathering of leaders across defense, security, technology, and government contracting. I'm Louisa Savage, Editorial Director of WP Intelligence. WP Intelligence is the Washington Post premium analysis and briefing service for executives who are navigating the intersection of policy, technology, markets, and geopolitics. And we really focus on moments like the one that we are in right now when it comes to defense procurement and contracting, when rules, incentives, and power structures are all shifting. And we translate those changes into practical insights for decision makers. And we do that through original reporting, forward-looking analysis, and live briefings and membership councils that bring leaders together directly into conversation with policymakers, operators, and innovators. So we are obviously at a moment right now when defense contracting is being reshaped both by urgent security demands, rapid technological change, and a real concerted effort by the government to push the system open for new players beyond the traditional primes. So today's discussion will build on our recent intelligence report, which you'll find in your seats, the Startup's Guide to the Pentagon's Procurement Overhaul, and it reflects how we work, which is helping leaders understand what's changing, why it matters, and how to respond. So we have on our panel today tremendous expertise to help us navigate this moment and this topic. I'll start with Jason Dean. He is WP Intelligence's lead AI and technology analyst. His latest coverage of defense and technology procurement, as I mentioned, is in the report in your seat, and he's been closely tracking how policy changes inside the Pentagon are translating into real opportunities and real constraints for companies who are working with the defense sector. At the end of the table is Dmitri Alperovitch. He's the chairman of Silverado Policy Accelerator and one of the most influential voices in Washington on technology, national security, and great power competition. He's long argued that the U.S. defense system needs to move faster to keep pace with modern threats, which makes him especially well-positioned to assess both the promise and the limits of the current reforms. Ben Cipperley is the Chief Strategy Officer at HavocAI, which is a defense startup that works with the U.S. Navy to build autonomous naval drones. He brings the startup's perspective, what it actually takes to move from innovation to deployment inside the Defense Department, and what kinds of friction slow things down. He is also a 26-year and 5-day veteran of the U.S. Navy. So he's seen it from both ends, and I think can speak to realities on both sides of the divide. And Randy Bishop is Chief Growth Officer at Venatore, where he works at the intersection of technology, defense, and commercialization. Translated into English, he helps startups navigate both the government innovation puzzle and also helping them grow horizontally to new customers and new agencies within the government. And he has also been a CTO both in industry and in government, so he's also seen the question from both sides. So together, I think we'll get a very full picture from policy design to on-the-ground execution of how Silicon Valley and the Defense Department are learning to work together. We have one rule for this conversation. We will not allow acronyms. And when they do pop up, we're going to buzz a buzzer and have them explained, or else I will not be able to follow what is happening. So I will
I'll try.
I know you're going to have a really hard time with this. So we're going to invite you to think about your questions, and a little later in the conversation, I'll call for audience questions from those who are here in the room. I know we have a lot of really amazing members here, so we look forward to your questions, but please keep them questions. So I just want to start to kind of level set. Jason, the audience has a copy of your report in their seats, and you argue that this year, 2026, marks really a critical implementation year for the Pentagon's new approach that the Pentagon, Congress, the administration have been talking about for a long time. So just briefly, please walk us through what's actually changing and why this moment matters for companies that are not traditional defense primes.
Sure thing. Thanks, Louisa, and thanks to all of you. I think, the
first year of this administration, there's been a bunch of executive orders and a bunch of other announcements and directives in this area of reforming the Pentagon's acquisition process. But the two biggest were Secretary Hegseth's full plan that he revealed in November, and the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, that was passed last month, that has a lot of statutory changes to the acquisition process. And so we're really at the front end of this. I mean, the administration, Congress have been emphasizing that this is the biggest change that we've had in a long time, but we're not to the proof stage really yet. It's a lot of talk, it's a lot of plans. The idea is to fundamentally speed things up and to embrace commercial technology so that we don't build our military acquisitions around these long developing, slow procurement programs that go through this very elaborate federal acquisition regulation system, but can move more quickly and can use commercial technology that's already out there and adapt it for military use. So that's the idea. This is the year we're going to start to see where they can actually make changes that matter on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Dmitri, you have argued for years that the existing system was misaligned with how modern technology is actually built and deployed. What problems is this overhaul trying to fix, and where do you still see structural obstacles remaining?
Yeah, I think one of the good things in these reforms is the push to be commercial first, right? When there's an existing solution that's been built for the commercial market, the department should try to adopt it as quickly as possible if it meets the needs of the warfighters, versus trying to reinvent the wheel and build it from scratch, which has been the tendency of the department, unfortunately, for way too long. The one area where I think there's still significant room for improvement is really in the procurement officers, contract officers, and the incentives that they currently have. One of the issues I see, and this is not even exclusive to the Department of Defense, but really Department of War, but really across the board, is that these contract officers are so risk averse because the only thing that they're being told early on is that you will go to jail if you do things wrong, and the thing that you should try to avoid is protests and losing protests in particular. And what we really, when we think about the taxpayer and the U.S. government, what we really want them to do is deliver capability as rapidly as possible that meets the needs of the warfighter, right? And to do that, I don't think requires new legal authorities. In fact, Congress has passed, 4 or 5 defense acquisition reforms in the last couple of decades. We're not significantly better off than we were before those reforms were passed. The issue we have is that you have a lot of authorities that are being given that are not being used by these procurement officers because they're so risk averse and they want to do things the way that they've always done it. And if you think about what it means to try to avoid losing protests, it means mountains of paperwork, make sure that every T is crossed, every I is dotted, and that's just not the outcome that you're going to get that the department really needs. And to change that culture, I think we really need to focus on the incentives of these individual contract officers, and particularly the things that they really care about, which is promotions, and maybe even cash bonuses. So I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post with Matt Cronin of Andreessen Horowitz, where we argued that you need to make sure that these people are incentivized for their promotions in particular based on speed of acquisition, based on the satisfaction of the program office. And if you do that, then magic happens, right? Because humans are focused on incentives and satisfying those incentives, and that's where we ultimately need to get to.
That's an excellent point. I think anyone in this room who leads an organization knows the importance of culture as being central to any kind of change. Ben, you're building a company that works directly with the Navy. From your vantage point, where does the Pentagon still struggle most when working with non-prime startups like yours?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, it's an exciting time. Thanks again so much for organizing this panel. the idea that companies are bringing more complete solutions, right? The idea, as Jason kind of alluded to, right, the primary driver with most of these reforms is around speed, of being able to move quickly from requirements to development to acquisition. And so when you have a company like ours, like a startup, we're working hard to bring complete solutions, right? To bring actual capability that works into the department on the front end, right? We're de-risking the R&D pipeline, which traditionally was a lot of government funding, is now mostly being funded privately in order to move faster. And so one of the things that, as you talked about, one of the things that we're seeing, right, with the development and the implementation of these portfolio acquisition executives, I didn't use an acronym, I wanted to. With these portfolio acquisition executives is the ability to kind of improve that speed, right? But for startups, one of the things that we have to be careful of is the entire department is not being reformed simultaneously. And so the front door is wide open, right? It's like, hey, come in, move fast. Like all of those things are happening. But eventually you get to the point where, hey, you need sustainment funding. You need to ensure that, the budget, which is built every 2 years, right? The Program Objective Memorandum, the POM, is still a thing. And so it's all very exciting right now. I think that will continue to kind of move the hard points down the pipe a little bit, right? So we're kind of hitting that first valve. We'll push through that first valve and keep going. All of those reforms are kind of taking hold and biting, but it's still, it still takes time, right? To Dmitri's point, the contracting process is still arduous. The incentive structure is still there. It still takes time to get that kind of traditional funding. We're seeing incredible speed with other transactional authorities, right? OTAs procured from prototype OTAs to transitioning to production OTAs, and so all of that is kind of coming on and is super exciting. And riding that wave is really fun. But understanding that at some point, hey, you've got to deal with the traditional defense acquisition system. And so just being ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Randy, we're going to come to you in a moment.
Middle-tier acquisition.
But before we get to you, I wanted to go to Jason to help us get concrete about what is changing. So I'm going to ask you to translate into English 4 terms that we're hearing a lot from the Pentagon and explain very concisely why each one matters to the companies in this room. So the first is, what does the Pentagon mean by a warfighting acquisition system?
I think this is, part of this is marketing. I mean, we're seeing this a lot in the current regime that we're changing the name from the Defense Department to the Department of War. So there's that element. I think there's also an intention to emphasize the urgency and the priority on the needs of the current needs of the warfighter, the people who are at the front lines. As opposed to the ideas of what will be needed in the future by program executive officers. Yeah.
Next term, what is a commercial solutions opening, and how is it different from traditional contracting?
This is an effort, this is a process that was pioneered by the Defense Innovation Unit, which is this office that was set up about a decade ago to kind of be a liaison with the tech industry and to pioneer new ways of acquiring things that allows the Pentagon to go around the federal acquisition regulations, which is this Byzantine multi-thousand-page rule book. And it enables, the idea is to get commercial technology providers into the process and through the process much faster than it had been under the existing system. And that's something that's being expanded under these current reforms.
All right, here's a good one. What does modular open systems architecture change?
That is the design there, or the idea there is to, instead of have everything be bespoke, to have a system of requirements and standards that then different commercial providers can fit into. So you don't have to, for every problem, spend years coming up with a custom-tailored solution. You can set up a set of standards, and that enables you to bring in commercial providers more quickly and to switch your providers when you need to, instead of being locked into a particular provider.
All right, and last one here. what do portfolio acquisition executives, what role do they play in this new model?
This is something that was established by the National Defense, I almost said NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act that just passed. And the idea is to consolidate the process or the thinking around acquisition, so you don't have every decision being made by a program executive officer at a micro level who has a very narrow responsibility, but people in charge of that process who can see across multiple drone programs, for example, and make decisions to, shift resources, et cetera. Whether that actually solves the problem or just consolidates it, as Ben was saying earlier, I think remains to be seen.
Okay, so we have the warfighting acquisition system, which is about the current needs of troops. Commercial solutions opening is kind of bypassing a lot of Byzantine complicated rules. Modular open systems architecture is about making things, you're saying, kind of like easier to fit together so that they're
and standardized.
Standardized, okay. And the portfolio acquisition executives is about giving the people making decisions a bigger aperture on the decisions that they're making. Okay, so these are the highlights of sort of what the Pentagon is trying to do. So Randy, from your perspective, you're advising startups, you've been on both sides of this equation. Which of these changes strikes you as the most consequential? And is there something missing there? We've heard culture. What's your assessment of this?
Yeah, I think the most consequential change is, I was going to say the portfolio acquisition executive, but listening to you, I think really the most consequential thing is this wartime acquisition thinking. I was a CTO for Defense Counterintelligence back in 2003 when the war started, and the change from the day before I took the job to the day after was this wartime thinking. We had to get capabilities into the hands of the folks in Iraq and then eventually Afghanistan very rapidly. And so I think back to the wartime thinking, but then I think the portfolio acquisition executives are really critical, because I've been on the other side in small business trying to navigate my way through these program executive offices in the Navy and the Army and elsewhere. And it was just so complicated to find the right person. And then I was on 2 startup companies, and I think the last part that you were discussing was the ability to get into an excited customer who really, really wanted your distributed blockchain system or our undeniably successful communications platform that we had built that everybody wanted in Indo-PACOM. And we just couldn't get past this excited captain or a Navy captain or an Army colonel or whatever into DOD to find a way to get the program objective memorandum written so that we could get through, I'm not even going to try to do the JSIDS thing, but through the process of getting written into a future sustained capability. So you literally got hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, but you couldn't find the person to write the documentation to get you into what's called a program of record. And so many of the technologies fall apart. I think the portfolio executive acquisition executives will help solve that, because then you'll have that sustained attention and you can do iterative improvements over time with them as a partner rather than just trying to fight the bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the business opportunities that this opens. Maybe, Ben, for you specifically as a startup, what kinds of capabilities or behaviors do you see the Pentagon rewarding more now than it has in the past?
So I'll hit on capabilities first, and then I'll get to opportunities. So clearly, unmanned robotic and autonomous systems is the capability that most of the Pentagon is pivoting around. Whether it's from evidence from the conflict in Ukraine, whether it's kind of what we've seen more broadly in the Asia Pacific theater, the ability to develop. To mature and ultimately to procure robotic and autonomous systems, right? The Navy started with robotic and autonomous systems as its first portfolio acquisition executive. The Coast Guard has stood up a PAE for RAS. The Army is actually starting to consolidate a lot of their robotic and autonomous systems, and the Marine Corps is leaning forward on making sure that their requirements are incorporated into some of these bigger programs. So I think, as Havoc, what we're starting to see is, the ability to, show an end-to-end solution, right? The ability in, kind of defense parlance to close a kill chain, primarily with robotic and autonomous systems, reducing the cognitive load on watch standards, being able to control thousands of autonomous systems with, like we envision as part of our warfighting concepts. And these are all things Havoc is really kind of pushing hard on, and have found really interested defense partners, both in the fleet, in the operating forces, and in the Pentagon. So from a capability standpoint, robotic and autonomous systems are absolutely the technology that is driving a lot of this behavior change. From an
Sorry, go ahead. No, finish your
well, just from a process standpoint, right, it's like and I talked about this a little bit in my first answer, is that, being able to leverage private capital in order to develop more complete technology solutions to de-risk the front-end research and development process, right? We don't have 10, 15 years to develop requirements. We don't have the ability to list out everything that we're going to want to do 5 years from now, right? Warfare is just changing too fast. And so what we've seen here is the opportunity with some of these organizations that stood up. I'll talk about the Navy Rapid Capabilities Office just for a second, is the ability to show, hey, I have a technology that can solve 6 of your operational problems, and they've highlighted those at various forums. And then what we start to see is the development of a partnership, right? The Special Operations Command has done this really well for a long time, where you have the warfighter next to the technology developer and really kind of getting after the exact requirements they needed to do. And now the services are starting to adopt that in ways that they haven't before. So I think that's one of the key opportunities.
Well, I keep seeing Dmitri nodding, so I want to go to you next. First of all, what do you think about the opportunity this creates? But also, what does the U.S., from a national security perspective, stand to gain here if this works, and what's the risk if it doesn't work?
Well, the risk is that we might lose the conflict, right? And no one wants to see that happen, particularly, great power conflict. But look, the opportunities are no doubt there. What I would advise startups right now and venture capitalists that are funding them is get a lot of patience, because this process is in the early innings. There's still a lot more work to do, and selling to the government is really hard, right? As someone who is sold to the government, as someone who is sold in the commercial sector, way easier to sell in the commercial sector. There's usually one buyer, there's usually one person to say no or yes. In the government, there's 1 million people to say no, and 1 million people you got to get to say yes. And I see a lot of startups having a great meeting at IndoPACOM or somewhere else where the need arises, and think that this is the end, and it's only the beginning of the process, because guess what? They don't acquire anything. And for the big service or other parts of the department to actually push an acquisition through takes a lot of time. Is very hard. You have to start probably with research projects, smaller projects, and work your way up until you get bigger buy-in. So it's still a process that unfortunately takes way too long, and we got to continuously work at shrinking it.
Ben, is that what Havoc did? Did you start with a small research project and then grow it over time, or did you have a different approach?
So we did. So the whole goal of Havoc when we first started was to command and control thousands of autonomous systems, right? There was an event that our founder, Paul Lewin, went to with then Undersecretary Hsu, where the whole idea was around how do we actually build the hellscape concept from IndoPACOM. And where the ability to build platforms was there as resident, right? There's a lot of facilities that are building really incredible platforms.
Sorry, hellscape concept.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so this is the sea denial concept in the Western Pacific as part of
sea denial.
So the
sink
ability
the Chinese fleet.
Thank you. So to sink the Chinese fleet, largely in a Taiwan context, and so it was the ability to command and control all of these thousands of systems, right? How do we avoid this? Because even now in Ukraine, right, most of these drones that we see are first-person video. So you have a single operator flying a single drone. If you put that on the scale of thousands of drones, it becomes untenable fairly quickly. And so how do you develop the command and control architecture, the system capable of executing this warfighting idea? And this is where Havoc was born, was how do I create a system by which I can control thousands of systems downrange? And it started fairly small, right? So the development of kind of the software and the technology, we built a couple of test articles of boats that the Navy decided, hey, these are really capable. We like what your autonomy is doing. It's one of the most mature things we've seen. And so we entered into a partnership with a Navy Warfare Center and built that over a series of exercises and demonstrated it out in Europe. And demonstrated it through fleet operations. And so now this has grown into, we're now working multi-domain, right? We're working with the Army on their autonomous resupply vessel and the capabilities and requirements that'll be associated with it. And then we've won a couple of Army competitions, right? So there was X-Tech Pacific, which was the ability to control several unmanned systems simultaneously over a series of hours, right? And we did kind of a really sophisticated maneuver with being able to intercept aggressor vessels as part of a formation protecting a larger kind of centralized high-value asset. And then X-Tech Overwatch, which was command and control of multi-domain, right? So air and
So
ground
how would you
systems.
summarize how you got over the million no's
Sure.
that Dmitri described?
So one of the ways is just keep trying, right? So you just have to know, you have to map the network. You have to understand your stakeholders. It's like any analysis. You have to understand who your stakeholders are, understand who your decision makers are, and then build kind of from the ground up, build trust in your system. Ultimately then to drive at higher and higher echelons, hey, we've proven this technology, right? The idea that you're not bringing them a problem, you're bringing them a solution. And this has been, one of the core tenets of how Havoc has been successful.
Got it. Well, Randy, I really was so curious to hear your thoughts here because you advise startups on exactly how to progress within government procurement, and what tactical recommendations can you share with the room about how to succeed in this new environment?
So I think the critical part of it is to know your potential customer, know their mission, know what, so they say, what keeps them awake at night. This Department of War is incredibly transparent about what they want to achieve. But if you read anything about the coming near-peer environment over in Indo-PACOM, and the lessons we're learning from Ukraine, which what I love about what you're talking about is, in Ukraine, they've pushed the decision-making down to the battalion level. So they get rewarded by how successful they are at fielding new technologies. And so they get, the more successful you are, the more money you get. So I'd say you really want to understand the mission of those you intend to help. And then also not just understand the mission set, but understand who's there wielding, the tiller on moving that thing back and forth. And then understanding, I think, really important sustainment part of all of this. So you're not just going to sell them something, but you want to make sure, like the open modular concept, you want to make sure that the government isn't, basically taken a hostage over one type of product or one type of software. So you want to go in with that mindset of, I have a solution, I understand what you're thinking and how you want to achieve it, and we want to become a technology partner of yours, and not just, here's something. It's like a sales mentality. Sell it to them and run away. No, you want to become that solution partner so that they're looking to you for additional support. And it may be something as simple as what you're talking about is, I create this swarm capability, which I've read a lot about, and it's amazing, is the idea of overwhelming the adversary with too many targets. But you're there looking for other opportunities to solve another problem with the same technology. And that's what happens. They start to trust you, and they want that, we call ourselves a capable set of hands. We want to be that partner that they trust enough that they say, hey, well, you're not doing this today, but do you think you could bring this solution to us? And I think that's the new mindset we want to be thinking about.
That's really insightful. I'd like to invite the audience to please raise your hand if you have a question. Think about your questions, and I'm going to go to Jason, and then a mic will come to you when you raise your hand. Jason, one of the hallmarks of our Washington Post intelligence reports is always actionable takeaways. So when you were doing the research for your report, talking to Pentagon officials, talking to startups and others, what were a few of the recommendations that you heard that you could share with this group?
Yeah, I think the first and most important, and both Ben and Randy touched on this, is to understand the landscape, know the customer, and know the people, know the system. And so right now that requires really following how these changes are being deployed, the ones that we talked about before. So we have these portfolio acquisition executives. The services are still delineating how they're going to divide those up and who will have responsibility responsibility for what, and then there will be officials assigned to those positions. And I think understanding how those are being divided up, who the people are, and where your technology fits in, and making sure that you have an offering that does fit in is critical to that. There are programs that are already embodying a lot of the things that we're talking about, a lot of the reforms that we're talking about. One former senior official I talked to cited the Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft, which is a program still in the works to develop drones that can fly along manned jets in combat, as an example of something that's incorporated a lot of these new approaches. If you have a technology, a product that fits into a program like that, where they have the people, they have the budget, they have the mentality, trying to work with those is a really good idea. And then another thing that I heard a lot is partnering with, so startups partnering with primes and vice versa. There's, I think a lot of companies are starting to do that. I think maybe Havoc has. And you get the advantage if you're a startup of the tremendous resources. I mean, the large defense contractors have entire teams of people who are doing what we were just talking about, like mapping the acquisition system, the people, what's needed where, and so you get some benefit of that as a startup, and as a prime, you can get some cachet, some of the agility and new innovation that comes from the startups through those partnerships. Obviously, both sides need to be careful, especially probably the startups dealing with those giants and making sure that their technology is protected and that they're developing their own relationships. But that's been a way forward for a lot of companies.
Excellent. We have a question in the audience. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, great panel. Doug Brooks, FGI Global Solutions. As an outsider to the Pentagon, one of the things that has always impressed me has been the standardization within the military. Whenever you build a gizmo, it fits. It uses the right energy source and everything. It seems to me speeding up the procurement process and everything is a really good idea, but how do you do it without breaking that standardization to the point where you're making gizmos that don't plug into other gizmos?
Excellent question. So to repeat for our video audience, standardization within the military, technical standardization, how do startups navigate that? Who would like to take that question?
I could start. I mean, I think back to what I was talking about earlier is these portfolio acquisition executives. I think that's going to be helpful. It's not proven yet. We were talking about that before. It's new. It could just stovepipe a bigger chunk of pie. Who knows? But I think that having the ability to build all that and be able to see across different platforms and make sure that they all fit together. But there's always the military standard, MIL standards too. I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations that drive things that must fit together. So I think it's doable, but we'll have to see.
I actually think it's a positive, because if things are standardized, you have components that you can buy typically off the shelf to satisfy those standards. So we actually need to move away from proprietary capabilities, which take a long time. You have to get really granular in your requirements to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. So standards are a huge help here.
Ben?
I think it's important to understand the differentiation between systems that benefit from rapid acquisition and maybe systems that are more, better fitted to the kind of the legacy acquisition. We don't want to necessarily buy ships, tanks, bombers quickly, right? We want to make sure that we maintain configuration control, because those are incredibly costly over the long term. Programs that last for 20, 50, 100 years are very different than systems that you want to buy every 2 years, because the technology moves fast enough that you can upgrade in fairly real time. And so I think it's important to understand the distinction. The services have incredible configuration management standards to the point these two gentlemen made, and so it's understanding where those things are most applicable and where you can afford to take risk.
Do we have another question in the audience? Go ahead, sir.
No, hey, thanks. Mick Bednarik, Floor Corporation. I really appreciate you putting this panel together. And Ben, to you and Dmitri, kind of highlight on a couple things that you mentioned having to do. Number one, Dmitri, with our contracting officers at KOs, education and training. I think there's a lot of us in the defense industrial base as we look to government contracts, et cetera, while the combatant commanders certainly have their own requirements. You mentioned Indo-PACOM and across the globe, but really the component commanders are the requirements generators. But back to the point that you both highlighted of our contracting officials and KOs, often, unfortunately, just because they got thrown in, they really don't have a good grasp and understanding. And Brother Michael Duffy's done a heck of a job with the guidance that he's been given. But what do you think is the way ahead, and how can the defense industrial base assist that as we move forward so we can be rapid and more innovative to meet the demand signal to support our joint warfighters? Thanks.
Look, I think most of these people mean well. They're patriots. They want to do the right thing. It's just that the government gets exactly what it asks for right now in this process that we've designed, which is avoid the headlines in the Washington Post that look bad, right, with regards to these programs, avoid going to jail because you've, made the wrong decision and violated some laws here. And I'm not saying that we should not be, we should be violating laws, but at the end of the day, when you look at successful rapid acquisitions in the last couple of decades at scale, there's only one that comes to mind, which is the AMRAP program that required Secretary Gates at the time to be personally involved, and people were dying every single day until that capability was delivered, right? So we can't live under that circumstance. You can't expect the Secretary or DepSec to be involved in all of these programs. You have to figure out how to institutionalize this with these contract officers so they act every day like someone could be dying, right, if they don't do the right thing. And it's not about generating mountain paperwork to make sure that they win a protest. It's about delivering the capability as quickly as possible to the field.
Ben, I want to ask you, now that you're on the other side, after all those years in the Navy, what's been your biggest sort of insight now that you're seeing how things work? Where is the biggest disconnect that you think you could help kind of translate?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me has been kind of expectation management, right? So when you're getting briefed on the government side, whether you're a resource sponsor or you're a program manager, the startup or the founder on the other side of the table is extraordinarily excited about what they're doing. They've made a lot of progress. They speak sometimes in terms that we don't understand inside the government, right? In terms of like how fast they're going and the different things that they've been able to do and the partners that they've attracted. But you're selecting like one among many and trying to figure out, right? The old system was such that you had to pick one, right? You had to pick the absolute best one and which one most closely fit all of your requirements, or none of them if they didn't fit your requirements. And now being on this side, I see the excitement. I see the drive of, somebody said they were patriots before, like the drive of these founders, these startups that are trying to solve hard operational problems, that see opportunity, that just have been beat down by the system. And so now with these reforms that the DoD or the DOW has undertaken, you're starting to see kind of breaks in the logjam, right? There's now holes, there's light coming through in a pretty Byzantine system. And that's been kind of the most exciting thing is companies really try hard to solve these operational problems that the government has struggled to, to be fair. Like Replicator in 2023, largely tried to take on this problem of, hey, how do we move faster, right? And with Detective Hicks at the time saying thousands of systems delivered within 2 years. We largely didn't meet that, and it's because that our voice track and our audio track were mismatched. Mm-hmm. And so now we're starting, like, being on this side, I see, holy man, that's a real opportunity, and there's so many people kind of driving behind it that's opening up. So I think that the kind of the interplay between the government and the commercial side is what's actually driving some of these reforms.
I know our time is about to run out, but one thing we always do at our briefings is we do a look ahead. So in one or two sentences, each of you tell us what you're working on next, starting with you, Jason.
I'm going to be looking at the government's initiative to use AI to accelerate scientific research.
Very cool.
We're looking at identifying technologies that will solve some critical problems over NIDO-PACOM in preparation for 2027.
Multi-domain autonomy, connecting air, surface, undersea, ground, both inside the U.S. and with our international partners.
Continuing to try to push the change of incentives for contract officers within the government.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Randy and Ben and Dmitri and Jason. I should also mention that both Dmitri and Ben's CEO, Paul, as well as several members of ISOA are part of our Global Security Council, so thank you for your participation. Thank you especially to Howie Lind and ISOA for the partnership on today's conversations. This is obviously an issue we will continue to cover very closely. Next week, we have a special live briefing on Thursday at 11:30 from the Washington Post stage in Davos, Switzerland during the World Economic Forum, and our topic will be Founders at the Frontier, and I'll be talking with startup founders who are shaping the next industrial era in domains such as energy, quantum computing, and AI. And we will also publish a series of video interviews from Davos with leaders in industry, finance, innovation, including the NATO Innovation Fund. So we invite you to sign up for our free WP Intelligence newsletter to learn more, and the QR code is in the report that you have at your seat. And to those of you in room and those of you watching virtually, thank you, and see you next week.